I'm Deanna Ziemba, Vice President of Business Development and Marketing at Charles E. Smith Life Communities. Thank you for joining us today at our 11th annual Sara and Samuel J. Lessans Healthcare Symposium and our second virtual symposium. We are glad you're able to join us for this virtual event today, and we hope that these 3 upcoming sessions that will be held over the next 3 Thursdays provide you with valuable information. I'd like to take a moment and recognize our partner, Suburban Hospital, a member of Johns Hopkins Medicine. We are glad to have them as partners in our planning of this important event. I'd also like to have a special welcome and recognition to Drs. Stuart and Ellen Lessans for their continued support of this program, named for Stuart's parents, Sara and Samuel Lessans. And finally, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Optum and Minkoff Company, for their support and dedication. I'd like to also recognize HFAM, the Health Facilities Association of Maryland, who make it possible for us to offer continuing education credits for social workers and nursing home administrators. Those attending today will receive 1.5 hours of continuing education credits. We have also received approval from Maryland Nursing Association to offer 1.5 of continuing educations for nurses. For those requiring social work or nursing home administration credits, continuing education credits, please know that we will provide an attendee list to HVAM to confirm your attendance. We will provide an attendee list also to Maryland Nursing Association for those requiring nursing credits. Following this program, you will receive an evaluation. Please include your name and email on that form when you return it. This will be sent to you via email, and it will be a SurveyMonkey. Once we receive that back, we will send you your certificate. We are honored to present this program each year to provide education to our community. As you know, this past year has presented us with extraordinary challenges, and we are grateful for our community support and the dedication of our team members who worked each day to care for over 1,100 older adults on our campus. Finally, I would also like to acknowledge and thank our Symposium Planning Committee. This group meets almost a year in advance to begin this planning. Their dedication, support, and expertise is what makes this event such a success. Thank you so much. Now I have the honor and privilege to welcome our President and CEO, Bruce Lederman.
Hello, I am Bruce Lederman, and as President and CEO of Charles E. Smith Life Communities, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 11th annual Sara and Samuel J. Lessans Healthcare Symposium. We are honored to present this event every year to provide education on relevant topics impacting the lives of older adults, and we are very glad you are able to join us virtually. I would like to recognize and thank Drs. Ellen and Stuart Lessans, who make this symposium possible, in loving memory of Stuart's parents, Sara and Samuel J. Lessans. For over 100 years at Charles E. Smith Life Communities, we have remained committed to providing quality care and meaningful life experiences for older adults. On any given day, those we serve are living their best lives on our campus in Rockville, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. Among the lifestyle options we offer for 1,100 older adults are at Revitz House and Ring House residences, where we provide vibrant and healthy aging in apartment-style living. At Landau House and Cone Rosen House, where assisted living is available and additional memory care support for those who are living with cognitive decline. And for those who require a short stay, our therapy and medical teams are available at the Warren Slavin Post-Acute Care Center, located in the Hebrew Home of Greater Washington, and where we also provide long-term nursing care. Thank you again for attending the symposium, and to learn more about CESLC, please visit our website at smithlifecommunities.org. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathleen McGinnis, and I'm the Director of Community Relations for Smith Life Home Care. Smith Life Home Care is a partner care company affiliated with Charles E. Smith Life Communities. We are honored to be a part of their community for more than 20 years. We have provided safe, kind, and now vaccinated certified nursing assistants to hundreds of families on the Charles E. Smith Life Communities campus and thousands of safe discharges from Montgomery County hospitals and Washington, D.C. We want to thank all of our community partners and mental health professionals for their partnership in care and their amazing pandemic support this past year. Thank you. So for over 20 years, Smith Life Home Care has been providing as much or as little support as needed to families throughout the Charles E. Smith Life Communities campus and Montgomery County and Washington, D.C. We feature personal care and health support, lifestyle services, short-term care, long-term care, and discharge services. For added value, when you choose Smith Life Home Care, we have a family room online, which is an electronic care portal that you can communicate directly with your care providers, a free home safety inspection for those choosing to age in place, a 24/7 phone line for any emergencies, Saturday, Sunday, and evenings, and an award-winning organization documented by Jewish News. If you have any questions about this service, you can call our number at 301-816-5020. A few quick options on how we can help you and your family. Just to remind you, we've been passionate about providing our clients with the best possible care so that you and your loved one has the best possible outcome. Many families are introduced to our services by a medical appointment or a discharge package. This will provide you or your loved one with something we call Home and Settled for $135 off campus, Montgomery County or Washington, D.C. This gives you a certified nursing assistant who will pick you up at your home or hospital, take you to your colonoscopy, wait for you, take you to the pharmacy, and return you safely to your home and get you settled and then depart. And that's the end of that 5-hour service. A little bit longer short-term introduction package is Transition to Home, which is $475, which is very popular for hip and knee replacements. They just need a little help at home, first 3 days of post-surgery, 6 hours, 3 days, 18 hours of care. That's available in Montgomery County and Washington, D.C. And last but not least, I would like to extend Smith Life Home Care thanks to the Symposium Planning Committee and the Charles E. Smith Life Communities team for all of their hard work that they do to bring this community education. Thank you so much. We're honored to be here, and back to Deanna.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And thank you to Smith Life Home Care for their dedication, passion, and services they provide to our older adults. Our first session, Lessons Learned, Risk and Protective Factors, will be led by Dr. Carolyn Eichberg. Dr. Carolyn Eichberg is a licensed clinical psychologist consultant for Charles E. Smith Life Communities, where she has provided behavioral health services to post-acute, long-term care, assisted living, and independent living residents for the past 13 years, including things such as neurocognitive testing, psychotherapy, multidisciplinary consulting, behavior management, decisional capacity evaluations, and staff in services. Sorry for getting tongue-tied there. Given the unprecedented demand for psychological services across all age groups, Dr. Carolyn Eichberg expanded her outpatient practice this past pandemic year to resume treatment of younger adults, including teens, college students, and parents of young children. Dr. Eichberg has published research papers and presented at conferences nationally and across the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. She attended both Cornell University and the University of Virginia and is a member of the American Geriatric Society. It is truly my honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Eichberg today.
Thank you, Deanna, for that kind introduction. The title of my presentation is Lessons Learned about the mental health impact of COVID-19 on older adults, risk and protective factors. The first slide lists the 19 topical areas I plan to cover today, followed by a pretty extensive list of references. And rather than simply read this list aloud, you can scan it while I dive right in, since we have a pretty ambitious agenda this morning. Let me start with a general overview of the mental health impact. 15 months ago, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. Strong measures implemented, such as social distancing and quarantine, effectively prevented disease spread. However, given the prolongation of the global health crisis, these infection control measures paradoxically had a range of negative consequences, namely an unprecedented toll on mental health. Last year, fear and panic caused by COVID-19 mushroomed rapidly. Now, fear is a natural defense mechanism against a potential threat, but when chronic or imbalanced, it can become a key component of various mental disorders. This is true for those with pre-existing mental diagnoses as well as previously healthy individuals. Preliminary findings in spring 2020 revealed that more than 50% of the general population reported considerably elevated levels of distress specific to the pandemic, with 16% reporting severe stress. By June 2020, the CDC reported 40.9% of the general population had at least one active mental health condition, and data suggests a similar impact worldwide. Epidemiological studies from the first 6 months made it clear that coronavirus had a disproportionately higher impact on mortality and morbidity in older adults. The Kaiser Family Foundation found that older adults additionally experienced an exponential increase in psychiatric symptoms. Now, news media has sometimes painted a rosier picture of older adults staying positive and even thriving during the pandemic. Later, I'll outline protective factors that might contribute to this finding. At the same time, my clinical experience has been that many older adults suffered in silence so as not to burden their children and grandchildren, whom they perceive were coping with an even more severe disruption of their lives. Not depressed doesn't necessarily mean our elders are flourishing. Now, the predominant focus initially was on the pathogen and its biological risk, with underestimated or only partially known neuropsychiatric effects of the lockdown. Even after we get enough population immunity, where the virus is not a major threat, mental health professionals believe the psychological implications may persist long after for older adults. For these reasons, this is an opportune time to pause and reflect on lessons learned about the mental health impact, including identification of risk and protective factors, along with intervention strategies to guide clinicians, researchers, administrators, families, and policymakers going forward. The harmful effects on mental health are considered more extensive and powerful than those of prior epidemics, and this is due to the stress and uncertainty of this virus. A survey by the National Center for Health Statistics found that 41% of Americans showed symptoms of an anxiety or depressive disorder in January 2021, and that was up from 34% in May 2020. In a retrospective study of over 81 million patients, Taquet provided estimates of major neurological and psychiatric conditions in the 6 months after a positive COVID diagnosis. Now, Watson had already evidenced that COVID-19 survivors were at increased risk of mood disorders 3 months after infection. Although decreasing at the 6-month mark, Taquet found that the estimated incidence of a neurological or psychiatric diagnosis 6 months post-COVID was 33.62%, with 12.84% receiving their first such diagnosis. And for patients who had been admitted to the ICU, the incidence was higher at 46.22%. The incidence for anxiety was 17.39%, psychosis 1.4%, and dementia 0.67%. And when compared with outcomes for patients post-influenza or other respiratory tract infections, most diagnostic categories were more common in patients who had COVID. And the occurrence of psychiatric disorders was believed to reflect, at least partly, the psychological implications of having COVID-19, rather than a direct manifestation of the illness. Psychiatric sequelae during the pandemic have not been limited to those who contracted the disease. Fear of the very realistic threat of COVID has led to various anxiety disorders and depressive states, maintained by incessant information about the virus, the number of infections, mortality rates, and initially insufficient control and treatment measures. Older adults with no prior psychiatric history have been at increase and substantial risk of new onset symptoms, including fear of self and or family contracting infection, fear of death for self and or family, fear of separation from family, insomnia, nightmares, generalized anxiety, depression, compulsive hand washing, compulsive sanitizing of household surfaces, panic buying, post-traumatic stress, alcohol or substance use, other harmful behavioral habits such as overeating or anorexia, difficulty concentrating, angry agitation, and somatic preoccupation with pain, GI discomfort, or other bodily concerns. Social isolation is a form of exclusion, resulting in the pain of loneliness. And we know that loneliness was already a profound public health concern for older adults, with 43% of adults aged 60 or older in the US feeling lonely. And the pandemic shelter-in-place order added exponentially to a feeling of aloneness. Loneliness exacts both a devastating mental and physical toll on older adults. It triggers a cascade of behavioral and biological processes which interact together to cause adverse health outcomes. A sample pathway might be that self-isolation leads to difficulty connecting with others, consequent changes in appetite and sleeping patterns, physical inactivity and a decline in cognition, followed by bouts of tearfulness with anger outbursts and blaming of others, the neglect of personal care, a descent into depression, and ultimately development of death, ideation, and wishes. And the extent of social isolation effects exceeds many other risk factors for mortality, such as obesity, and may even correlate to premature death. Older adults this pandemic year complained of what Weingarten calls multidimensional tiredness, feelings of mental, physical, social, and/or existential fatigue, often accompanied by a gloomy or despondent mood and listlessness. Some have described old age in these times as a mind-numbing monotony, waiting in a void for death to come. Simultaneously, most feel guilty, with difficulty resigning themselves to this apathetic state, because it's irreconcilable with the idea of how they once lived an active life. Many older adults became fearful of being forgotten or neglected as this global health crisis unfolded. Senior residential care facilities, including nursing homes and assisted living, were hit especially hard by a disproportionate rate of illness and death, posing a realistic source of existential distress. And lockdowns precipitated fear that residents would never see their loved ones again in their lifetime. Elders were also cognizant of public statements about their expendability, or the use of age as a key criterion to determine the allocation of scarce medical resources. This awareness exacerbated general worries and levels of anxiety and added to feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and resentment. Studies evidence that pandemic-related stress not only caused new onset adjustment disorders, it aggravated pre-existing psychiatric symptoms and conditions. These include generalized anxiety, obsessive compulsive, post-traumatic stress, major depressive, bipolar, and insomnia disorders. Before COVID, we know that depression already affected more than 6.5 million of the 35 million adults 65 or older. Prescription rates for antidepressant, anxiety, and insomnia medications have risen substantially during the pandemic, with anti-anxiety meds in particular soaring. And difficulties for some in obtaining mental health services or specific psychiatric treatments led to mental health relapses and behavioral disturbances. Some existing psychiatric conditions evolved into psychotic or paranoid disorders. In 2018, the CDC reported that adults in the 75 to 84 year and 85 and older age groups were among those with the highest rates of suicide. Suicide prevention researchers and public health experts issued warnings this past year of a substantial increase in suicide rates among older adults, given COVID-related increased fear and despair, restriction of access to social supports or mental health programs, and financial anxiety due to the impact of stock market volatility on retirement savings. An elevation in suicide risk has been fueled not only by anxiety, stress, uncertainty, and isolation, but also by the broader messages that convey to older people that perhaps they don't matter. Wingard's analysis of an elder's wish to die is that it's driven by a strong human desire to be visible, recognized, wanted, needed, valued, and depended upon or attended to by others. During this pandemic, older adults have been at risk of loss of self-worth and perceived life meaning. The pandemic year has also had a significant impact on cognition. Neurologists report the demographics of patients they're seeing with post-COVID neurological syndromes are worrisome, with some reporting lasting brain effects that include difficulty with concentration, word finding, and completing complicated tasks. Yale neurologist Sputnik hypothesized that the heightened immune reaction triggered by the virus might unmask underlying early-stage memory disorders. She posited further that some neurocognitive symptoms might be due to or intensified by the trauma of COVID isolation and the stress of this tumultuous moment in history. The Alzheimer's Association has funded an international study to follow 40,000 survivors of COVID in 40 countries to understand the long-term effects on their brains and nervous systems as they age. Now, we know when people with dementia develop COVID-19, they are often more susceptible to delirium, as Engelhardt observed in her Washington Post article titled "A Year of Accelerated Unraveling." When all alone in hospitals or on isolation units, without familiar caregivers to reorient and coax them to drink or help them to move around, these patients sometimes slip into what we call a failure cascade. They may develop UTIs, pressure ulcers, lose muscle mass, forget they are sick, and try to get up to go to the bathroom, then fall, break their hips, decondition, and fail to thrive. For older adults already diagnosed with cognitive impairment who did not contract the virus, geriatricians have also observed an acceleration of decline. For more than a year now, the pandemic has interrupted routines, divided families, and curtailed social interactions that are so important for brain health. In lockdown nursing homes, patients with dementia have seemed more adrift in the absence of routine, time-blocked schedules and family faces. Some develop more agitated behaviors, show less positive affect, and more apathy. Some are frightened by seeing nurses and staff in masks. If and when a loved one was allowed to visit a facility, it's often been for just an hour, in an unfamiliar room, fully masked and seated 6 feet apart or separated by a window. All of this is terribly disorienting inside a mind that is already deeply disoriented. We have also seen a cognitive impact on older adults with no prior diagnosis of impairment. Indeed, as UC Irvine neuroscientist Yasser observed, we're all walking around with some mild cognitive impairment. Franklin, a Georgia Tech neuroscientist, explained, two of the things that are really good for our brains are physical activity and novelty. A thing that's very bad for brains is chronic and perpetual stress. And prolonged boredom is, somewhat paradoxically, hugely stressful. Well, living through the pandemic has exposed people to microdoses of unpredictable stress all the time. Franklin's research shows that such stress changes the brain regions that control executive function, learning, and memory. As the country entered its second year of disease precautions, many people reported feeling a pandemic brain fog, which includes an inability to focus, difficulty sleeping, and feelings of negativity. Banaktapour, a Northwestern neurologist, explained that brain fog is caused by a wide range of factors, including isolation, anxiety, lack of sleep, and decreased levels of daily structure, mental stimulation, environmental enrichment, exercise, and light. All these factors fatigue the brain, especially the frontal network, which contributes to memory, recall, and attention skills. University of Oklahoma psychiatrist Tucker identified a post-COVID-19 type of traumatic stress disorder. Those meeting qualifying criteria for this type of PTSD include individuals who suffered severe COVID-19 illness and potential death, witnessed other suffering and death, learned about the death or risk of death of a family member or friend due to the virus, or individuals such as journalists, first responders, and hospital personnel who experience extreme exposure to aversive pandemic details. And images seen on the 24/7 news cycle of illness, death, and violence have also triggered severe stress responses. And for some, these images stimulate traumatic memories from their past lives. And studies have explored other, more general stressors, which include making difficult medical decisions, inadequate PPE, and/or being a caregiver. Indeed, call to the Alzheimer's Association's 24/7 helpline from at-home caregivers for a parent, spouse, or other family member with dementia have escalated since adult daycare programs closed and due to caregivers' fear that it wasn't safe to let private nursing aides into their homes. Some family caregivers admitted to being at their breaking point, losing it and yelling at their loved one. One might ask, what's so uniquely stressful about COVID in contrast to other infectious diseases and/or natural disasters? Well, it's highly contagious and spread to the population by asymptomatic individuals. It can also take longer before people show symptoms, and people can be contagious longer. It's lethal to a small percentage, but there's limited capacity to identify who's vulnerable to severe symptoms. And initially, there was little effective treatment. On the basis of a longitudinal survey of a large sample of American and Canadian respondents from March to July of 2020, Asmundsen identified a COVID stress syndrome with an interconnected network of symptoms. COVID stress syndrome is associated with negative mental health and socially disruptive consequences such as panic buying, excessive avoidance, and unhelpful ways of coping during self-isolation. Using this survey data, Asmundsen developed a COVID stress scale. This scale assesses 5 core features of COVID-19 related stress: fear of danger and contamination, fear of adverse social economic consequences, checking and reassurance seeking, xenophobia or discrimination against foreigners, and traumatic stress symptoms such as pandemic-related nightmares. The CSS offers promise as a tool for identifying people in need of mental health services. Another tool for identifying dysfunctional anxiety, otherwise known as coronaphobia, is the Coronavirus Anxiety Scale, developed by Christopher Newport University psychologist Lee. The CAS is comprised of 5 somatic-based symptoms of anxiety that are triggered by thoughts or information about COVID. As we entered 2021, our acute state of anguish from the early days of the pandemic shifted to feelings of spiritual and emotional exhaustion with life. In her January 2021 Washington Post article, Mara used the running metaphor of hitting the wall to describe COVID fatigue. Now, in marathon running, this is a phenomenon of suddenly running out of energy that's predictable around the 18 or 20 mile mark of a 26.2 mile race. Well, the pandemic has been an ultra marathon, and we have no idea of how close we are to the finish line. As Sullivan exclaimed in her March 2021 Washington Post editorial, keeping on is exhausting. And how are you is as much commiseration as greeting. Back in January 2021, older adults felt a lot of disappointment and depletion. Many were hoping that vaccinations and having a new president would change life immeasurably. But some old problems persisted. There was disagreement about economic relief. Vaccine rollouts were chaotic in some states. Weather was too cold in many places for relatively safe outdoor gatherings, and coronavirus variants emerged. By April 2021, Lyle wrote in the New York Times that we have all hit a wall, or a late-stage pandemic crisis of productivity, will, and enthusiasm. Folks described feeling exhausted all the time, with increased incidence of malaise, burnout, and Zoom fatigue. 2 weeks later, psychologist Grant named languishing, or the sense of stagnation and emptiness, as the dominant emotion of 2021, a feeling like you're muddling through your days, looking at life through a foggy windshield. Werenberg, author of the book Pandemic Anxiety, explained that a year of uncertainty, of seeing expert predictions wither away and goalpost shift, has left many people feeling discombobulated and as if they are existing in a world shaded in gray. She explained further that when people are under a long period of chronic unpredictable stress, they develop behavioral anhedonia, the loss of the ability to feel pleasure in their activities, with lethargy. A McGill psychiatrist, Raja, explained that the longevity of the pandemic, with its endless monotony laced with acute anxiety, contributed to a sense that time was moving differently, a hazy time warp lasting forever. Yas explained that when stress extends over time, it's very dangerous, as it disrupts our sleep cycles and regular routines of physical activity, and this impact makes it very difficult for the body to be resilient. Now, I've already highlighted many risk factors that elevate mental health symptomatology in older adults, and these include isolation, social physical activity restrictions, experiences of illness and loss, COVID-related worries, and loneliness. But contributors also include more exposure to abusive households, food insecurity, mistrust in healthcare institutions, and the lack of web-enabled smartphones or other electronic devices. Without high-speed internet connectivity and/or the understanding of how to use it fully, many older adults have been cut off during the pandemic from family, guardians, and healthcare providers who relied on virtual meetings to maintain contact. A new study from JAMA found that older people were among those reporting fewer telehealth visits. Indeed, this digital divide impeded remote access by seniors to behavioral health support. An additional risk factor is being deprived of in-person holidays and family milestone events, such as birthdays, graduations, or weddings. These gatherings are like chapter breaks that give shape to a year and mark the passing of time. As one of my patients lamented, the lack of in-person ceremony and celebration felt like cutting pages or vivid memories out of her life story. During a year when older adults could especially use extra comfort, the loss of both reliable holiday traditions and being able to anticipate family life cycle get-togethers made them feel additionally unmoored, or what Pinsker refers to as having no horizon in sight. Further, feelings of insignificance provoked a perceived loss of control and not being heard. This includes not being consulted directly about decisions that pertain to their health care, residential situation, and/or quality of life. Finally, personality characteristics have played a critical role in either enhancing or detracting from an older adult's ability to adjust to pandemic-related stress. Individuals at most risk include those who are self-critical, with poor self-esteem, low adaptability, and/or high dependency. Not surprisingly, introverts had a less difficult time, at least initially, than extroverts. To counteract risk factors, we must promote protective factors to safeguard the emotional well-being of older adults. Some practical coping suggestions include stop reading, watching, and listening to news about the pandemic. Understand it's normal and valid to feel stress and fear in unpredictable situations. Use relaxation techniques such as deep rhythmic breathing or meditation. Regulate emotions and thoughts using cognitive behavioral strategies. Ask for mental health help. To address social health, maintain some form of contact with family and friends, explore modified practice of religious or spiritual activities, interact with animals or pets, join a virtual community group. And to address physical health, maintain a daily schedule and exercise pattern, make time for leisure activities, discover new enjoyable self-pursuits, maintain a healthy and balanced diet, obtain enough sleep, maintain good personal hygiene, avoid excessive drinking of alcohol and/or drug use, and take prescriptive medicine as usual. Access to and proficiency with technology has played an enormously important protective role in affording greater social connectivity with loved ones, online activities, and accessing care via telehealth visits. Leslie Jordan at the University of Maryland School of Public Health identified forward-focused coping as a protective strategy against symptoms of depression and anxiety. Her research team surveyed 800 adults, 50 and over, about how they cope with last year's psychosocial stressors. Forward-focused coping involves staying focused on goals and plans, maintaining a regular routine, or engaging in comforting or helping others. And this contrasts with trauma-focused coping behaviors that include dwelling on feelings of trauma or loss, observed in the form of obsessively consuming news during the pandemic. Finally, I'm a huge proponent of engagement with nature as a protective factor, including nature hikes, gardening activities, or simply sitting outdoors. Like the cicadas that careen slowly, our elders are now emerging into the sunlight. Studies show that spending time in nature positively affects one's health. And if we had more time, I'd be delighted to share photos with you of my pandemic project last summer and early fall, breeding monarch butterflies. But I want to shift now to highlight 3 positive personality traits outlined by Canadian psychologist Gordon Flett that I've observed in my clinical practice to have helped older adults regain, sustain, or improve their mental well-being during this time of adversity and stress. These are ego integrity, self-efficacy, and resilience. The first protective factor, ego integrity, or self-integration, is the most ideal psychological state a person can achieve in advanced age. Those familiar with the work of renowned psychologist Erik Erikson will recognize this as the final 8th stage of psychosocial development, in which older adults engage in retrospection, looking back on their lives and accomplishments. They develop feelings of contentment and integrity if they believe they led a happy and productive life. Conversely, if they look back on a life of disappointments and unachieved goals, they may instead develop feelings of despair. Stay-at-home orders and social isolation provide an extended and concentrated opportunity, whether desired or not, for older adults to engage in such contemplation. Their existential question has been, is it okay to have been me? Some on their own, others in psychotherapy, while still others assisted by family members, have been working this past year, with and without struggles, to accept his or her life with contentment and without regret, having a balanced view of past, present, and future. The second protective factor, self-efficacy, refers to the confidence or expectation of one's ability to successfully perform an action or activity to produce desired results. According to studies, self-efficacy reduces the negative effects of stress, mediates 40% of the effects on depression, and plays a beneficial role in promoting mental health. Self-efficacy has also been associated with increased energy, better sleep, decreased pain, and overall satisfaction with life. A core component of self-efficacy is a fear and aversion towards dependence. For older adults who attach great importance to their independence, COVID-related restrictions imposed upon them sometimes evoke strong feelings of aversion. Even if understandable from a health safety standpoint, the perceived exclusion from systems of decision-making upset and angered many. Those with more adjustment difficulties ventilated feelings of distrust and being infantilized to me, bemoaning that their lives had been taken over by senior living facility staff or adult children. In contrast, the belief that older adults could still contribute in meaningful ways to their family and or community, or the opportunity to still carry out worthwhile projects that she or he was committed to in life, increased levels of self-efficacy. Now, some view the act of self-isolation as a choice they were capable of making for the longer-term common good. More recently, I've witnessed the resumption of volunteer activities and resident council meetings in some senior care communities as contributing to improved resident morale. The third protective factor, resilience, is defined by Allen as a dynamic process of maintaining positive adaptation and effective coping strategies in the face of adversity. Now, high resilience predicts strong coping skills, a longer lifespan, low depression, a positive mind, strong support networks, and dynamic physical activity. And we know that resilience reflects an interaction among various factors, including an individual's internal stress response, emotional regulation, cognitive capacity, personality traits, and physical health, together with external resources like social networks, cultural spiritual support systems, and financial stability. What I believe has been missed by society at large during this pandemic is the opportunity to learn and benefit from the survival resources and resiliency factors cultivated by older adults who have lived through times of oppression, discrimination, war, disease, and financial collapse. We can learn so much from our elders about the capacity to adapt to circumstances we cannot change, no matter how difficult, and to never lose hope that things will improve. As a 5K race participant in the 2019 National Senior Olympic Games, the spirit and determination of the nearly 14,000 other competitors aged 50 to 103 has motivated me as a repeat qualifier to keep up my practice runs while awaiting the rescheduled 2021 National Games. These senior athletes exemplify overcoming obstacles, taking on life challenges, and practicing healthy aging to achieve what these Olympic Games call their personal best. And in the course of my career, I've also gained inspiration from men and women I've worked with who are war veterans, along with survivors of the Holocaust or other traumatic life experiences. They serve as an example of the human spirit's tenacious ability to persevere, adapt, rebuild, and recover from adversity. Now, a source of resilience is a psychological construct of mattering, defined as feeling important to others in ways that give people the sense that they're valued and cared about as human beings. Mattering is a strong buffer of stress for older adults. 5 components of mattering have been identified. First, the sense that other people depend on us. 2, consider us to be important. 3, are actively paying attention to us. 4, would miss us if no longer around. And 5, appreciate us. Mattering is linked with joy and flourishing, as it provides connection and comfort, and with positive health behaviors, along with fewer chronic health conditions. Conversely, the feeling of not mattering can be associated with deep psychological pain and linked with depression. Flett suggests the pandemic illuminated a mattering gap for older adults. Some very troubling views about the expendability of older people have been expressed. These include the use of age as a key criterion to determine allocation of scarce medical resources such as ventilators, or for denial of transport to hospitals for treatment. Also disconcerting in 2020 were the stories of heinous incidents of neglect and mismanagement in some facilities across the country and around the world. It's natural for older adults aware of these developments to become increasingly alarmed and demoralized, not only about their health status prospects, but also by the overarching question of whether they matter at all. Older adults who already felt marginalized for racial, social, political, and or economic reasons have been particularly susceptible to pandemic-related stress. As Flett observes, we need to do a better job of helping older adults feel valued and cherished rather than dispensable. Clinically, some patients voiced intense sorrow to me. Most used to be active members of society, but the pandemic accelerated recognition that they've lost a sense of meaning, purpose, and belonging. Some resigned themselves to the fact that other people had taken over their previous life functions, be it in a career professional role or as a homemaker. Many have retired, declined in mobility, moved to a senior living community, outlived spouses, with adult children independently able to manage their own lives, and grandchildren no longer in need of babysitting. One individual described this as looking through the wrong end of a pair of binoculars, with everything looking further away, and another as being seated in the nosebleed section of the ballpark bleachers while still wishing to be standing down on the pitcher's mound. We need to recognize that older adults, no matter what their functional status, still have an intense longing to make a valuable contribution. And we, as a society this past year, haven't done a good job of making them feel as if their contributory role is taken seriously and is needed. Mattering is a concept that translates well into practical actions with a prevention and promotion focus. On our campus, staff enlisted residents in a card decorating campaign to show healthcare workers they matter. Some independent living facility folks adopted, so to speak, a co-resident to check on and provide assistance. And Flett emphasized the vital involvement for elders to show caring and nourishing of young people, especially family members. And in this vein, I've counseled families to engage their parents or grandparents as virtual homework helpers or bedtime story readers with mutually beneficial outcomes. In February, as our nation mourned more than 500,000 lives lost a year into the pandemic, Edelman cautioned in the Washington Post that a pandemic wave of collective grief posed a potential public health crisis of its own. Last month, an analysis by University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation estimated COVID-related deaths of more than 900,000, a number 57% higher than official figures. With each COVID death affecting an estimated 9 survivors, this would mean that more than 8 million Americans as of May 2021 are grieving loved ones lost to the virus. Beyond deaths, there have been so many additional losses. Collectively, we lost a way of life in 2020 and precious time spent with loved ones. Longitudinal studies of survivors of Chernobyl, 9/11, and Hurricane Katrina show elevated rates of mental health problems due to sustained grief, in some cases lasting for more than a decade. Psychologist Lee and Niemeyer surveyed more than 800 Americans who had lost a loved one to COVID. What they found was alarming. 2/3 of respondents described a grief that was anguishing, preoccupying, and dysfunctional, and that it seriously impaired their ability to function in relationships or perform adequately in their daily life roles. Risk factors associated with loss include distress about a loved one dying alone, feeling isolated by social distancing guidelines, and being disappointed by the quality of the funeral or memorial services. All these factors contribute to what Lee and Niemeyer termed pandemic grief, a distinctive grief so profound that it has become a central preoccupation. Social isolation has made grieving even more solitary. As in 1918, funerals have again become stripped-down facsimiles, with some long-standing cultural and religious traditions abbreviated or abandoned. Zoom funerals haven't provided people with the in-person support needed to work through the loss of a spouse, close friend, parent, or other family members. Some family members postpone memorial services and their own expressions of grief until groups can again safely gather. Edelman refers to this as siloed bereavement. Now, not being able to collectively grieve can have profound health consequences. And this is because rituals allow people to draw on the comforts of the past while projecting a loved one's influence forward. The late anthropologist Meyerhoff highlighted that rituals and communal ceremonies help people mark the transition of an individual from one phase to another and connect mourners to society or to a group to keep them from feeling loss. As an extension of the prior discussion of mattering, what we need to do for those who are grieving is to help them feel that the lives of their loved ones lost to COVID mattered. The public acknowledgement and memorial services broadcast by the new presidential administration help survivors know that the over 500,000 deaths had not been minimized or words forgotten. To ensure the legacy of those lost to COVID lives on in perpetuity, we need to listen to the stories of a loved one's life and death with compassion and without judgment. Actively remembering instead of passively mourning is essential to healing. Folks have been so eager for a return to normal. However, as McBride wrote in her March 2021 Washington Post editorial, embracing the shift to post-pandemic life has triggered some anxiety and ambivalence. Many are beginning to exhale, while many others are still buried deep in grief or fearful that they will be disappointed by future bad news, such as the reinstitution of family visiting bans at senior facilities, the emergence of new variants, or the need for a booster shot. Now, pre-COVID, teenagers talked about FOMO, a fear of missing out. But upon reentry to society, McBride observed that many of us are facing something new, FONO, a fear of normal. We've begun to relax restrictions, but now that we've conditioned ourselves to behave in a certain way, unlearning solidified habits can feel disconcerting. Although older adults face inherent struggles, there have been hidden silver linings for some. As Cornell psychiatrist Friedman observed, there's a wide variation in human social affiliation. The lockdown afforded those comfortable with less interaction time to indulge in what they have always preferred. As Roxanne Roberts wrote in her April 2021 Washington Post editorial, introverts, while missing close friends and family, savor the ability to go days without seeing and speaking to another person, which they find so draining. Psychologist Whithouse called the pandemic a time of measurement, a rare historical event so profound that it alters perception and personalities, just as was true after World Wars I and II. Indeed, the COVID lockdown gave both extroverts and introverts time for self-examination. Many vaccinated people continue to harbor irrational fears about COVID risks. A survey in March by the American Psychological Association found that 48% of vaccinated adults felt uneasy about returning to in-person interactions once the pandemic ends. As Lionheart wrote in his April 2021 New York Times article, coming to grips with the comforting realities of post-vaccination life is going to take some time for most of us. On April 28th, we had to make a whole new set of calculations about risk when the CDC eased safety guidance about mask wearing outdoors. Some folks celebrated with face exhibiting exuberance, while others felt trepidation at the thought of shedding masks. 2 weeks later, on May 13th, the CDC abruptly revised guidelines for vaccinated people again, stunningly telling them they could stop wearing masks or physically distance under most circumstances, indoors as well as outdoors. Many cheered, while others vented frustration over a lack of clarity about safety rules complicating reopening efforts. Some voiced apprehension, aware of the caveat from infectious disease experts that COVID is unlikely to be eradicated and that some measures to combat it could remain part of our world if it flares anew come winter. Spring holidays this year sparked tension in some family systems in response to members not yet ready to reunite for gatherings, even though fully vaccinated and immunized. Everyone needs to have patience, both with themselves and others, as all of us adjust. At the same time, as learned with other pandemics, we do need to monitor for signs of agoraphobia, an anxiety disorder in which people fear leaving their homes. To help manage reentry anxiety, it's important to validate the trauma we've all experienced and to normalize the existence of rational and irrational thoughts and fears as not being crazy. I'm teaching older adults how to use coping tools such as meditation and breathing techniques. Additionally, directing them to focus on scientific facts to halt rumination or endless loops of irrational worry. Further, to start off taking incremental, relatively safe steps toward exposing themselves to anxiety triggers, such as meeting a friend who's also vaccinated outdoors. COVID rewrote our lives on a granular level, from the ways we work and play to how we dream and communicate and touch. Public officials in the scientific community can offer us information and solace, but they cannot give us answers for what our new normal will look like because this is unfamiliar terrain. As Shelton wrote in her New York Times March editorial, post-vaccination, many of us are rediscovering what optimism feels like. She emphasizes, however, that we need to work to maintain joyous feelings. Dr. Kumar at Chapman University explains that the human mind prioritizes negative experiences to be remembered more strongly than positive ones, as a way for us to prioritize threats in our environment. And while this is good for evolution, excessive worry isn't helpful for one's emotional well-being. Shelton recommends 5 strategies to practice happiness daily. First, savor small moments when something good or sweet happens, such as hugging a grandkid or seeing a butterfly alight in a flower. 2, marvel as much as you can. UC Berkeley researchers show that students who experience awe had the lowest levels of an inflammation marker. Klein, author of The Awe Factor, recommends going on a daily awe walk. 3, be grateful and kind. A Riverside, California study revealed that simply reflecting on past kind deeds improved well-being at a rate similar to actively going out and doing a good deed. 4, realize that depressive symptoms may not subside as the pandemic slowly wanes without getting some help from a mental health professional. And 5, break out your calendar and schedule a few safe activities, even if the big time activities aren't back. Due to some continued travel restrictions, compounded by hesitancy, mobility, and/or health concerns, many older adults will continue to spend extended periods of time at home and alone. Mindfulness has become a popular behavioral health treatment approach, with the emphasis on living in the moment. Now, whereas being present has been shown to help individuals combat stress and chronic pain, in his Washington Post editorial, Richard Cohen highlights research suggesting that we adapt to challenging circumstances by doing the opposite. In March, he argued that it was desirable, even imperative, to mentally transport ourselves to a better place or different moment in time. I find Cohen's recommendation to escape through one's imagination as a way to cope especially applicable to older adults. Harvard researchers Buckner and Carroll refer to this ability to separate from the present as mental time travel. The pioneering memory psychologist Toving is credited with first acknowledging the uniquely human ability to decouple oneself from the present environment and to allow one's mind to recollect a specific time and place of a past event in one's personal history. Toving coined this episodic memory. This past year, I've observed great benefit from implementing this self-projection technique with older adults. For example, some look backwards to relive a holiday celebrated in childhood with parents, or how they met and courted a beloved late spouse. Others look forward to imagine how they'll behave when it's safe to travel again and what it will feel like to hug their adult children or meet a great-grandchild. Some of my patients enthusiastically shared past travel stories. For an instant, they were no longer present in a current world of despair. Rather, they were transported to another, happier and more carefree time and place. Helping older adults hatch a desired post-COVID plan to pick up where last adventures ended can serve as a much-needed escape. If we can help them conjure up a clear image of an ideal future moment, achieving that goal might feel more tangible and attainable. To quote the renowned psychologist William James, anything you may hold firmly in your imagination can be yours. UCLA psychologist Taylor argues that the act of imagining makes future events seem real, especially when incorporating details from the past. For example, an older adult might imagine an upcoming grandchild's wedding by recalling snippets from weddings she or he attended in the past, including his or her own, all nestled in long-term memory, or from a book read or a movie watched. Using photos or old letters as conversational prompts reminds them of what they were doing on this day X years ago. In Cohen's words, they provide a boarding pass for a mental voyage. As an extension of mental time travel, and to enhance a sense of mattering and achieve self-integration, I highly recommend providing older adults with the opportunity to tell their life story, whether prompted by a family member, friend, senior care facility staff, clergy, or mental health professional. My clinical experience confirms Kenyon's hypothesis that people's resilience is augmented to the extent that their stories are strengthened through some mode of narrative care, whether this be engagement in reminiscence, a life review process, guided autobiography, psychotherapy, or simply soulful conversation. What I've witnessed is that the year of social isolation almost universally caused older adults to reflect backwards on their lives more intensively, critically, and without distraction or diversion relative to pre-COVID times, to try and make sense of past or present events in the context of their journey as a whole. This was true even for adults with short-term memory challenges, as they can still access more intact, crystallized historical memories. Now, on the positive side, many were able to achieve peace, that they had lived a full, blessed life. For so many others, this process aroused difficult emotions about some unfinished or unresolved issues, and they succumbed to depression and despair, with the conviction that their life story had effectively ended, what Kenyan terms narrative foreclosure. The lockdown afforded many, with supportive resources, the opportunity to restory the difficult chapters of their past lives. The changes that come with later life, including retirement, disability, relocation, and loss, constitute challenges to an older adult's very sense of self. The pandemic further challenged our elders' sense of existential meaning. Thus, as Randall argues, how older adults story their lives is of pivotal importance, and the use of narrative serves as a principal vehicle or therapeutic tool. A core finding to take from narrative research is that if older adults can narrate difficult episodes in their lives with coherent, positive resolution, then the stories they weave around those episodes can remind them of their ability to overcome adversity. Although it can take courage, sharing out loud reduces some of the power these stories have over their lives. Without stories, memory becomes frozen. Indeed, I've observed that many older adults high on ego integrity and resilience have been better able to use autobiographical reasoning to try and make meaning of how this pandemic is impacting their lives. Conversely, as Randall explains, the inability to achieve positive resolution is linked to a lower level of resiliency. In such instances, I use the technique of integrative reminiscence. As explained by Wong, this involves helping individuals to remember difficult life experiences, accept them, and try to reframe negatives into positives. For example, I or my loved ones learned from this, grew from this, am better off because of this, or am stronger now. In brief, to create meaningful coherence between one's past and present, rather than engage in obsessive remembrances of troubling episodes or relationships. Such reminiscing is argued to be characteristic, Wong argues, of what he calls successful agers. Some patients have commented, things happen for a reason. It was meant to be. That was then, but I am safe now. Or growing up, I had a special someone who made me feel worthy. Knowing a person's life story has the power to build connection and compassion. And this is a key part of the use of narrative care in our healthcare environments. It results in a holistic view rather than just a focus on the physical problems a patient is having. Preserving the stories of our elders through the use of narrative care is a key intervention to enhance an older adult sense of mattering, to lend a rootedness, a meaningfulness, and a sense of existential security to their lives as a whole. I can attest to the profound impact of oral history projects for survivors of the Holocaust, conveying to them that their life story reaches beyond the boundaries of individual self and connects them with the evolving stories of others, one's community, and the history of our world. As I forecast in a FaceTime live talk I gave back in April 2020, COVID-19 has redefined our lives, transformed those of our loved ones, and the emotional well-being of the patients I treat. The degree to which the surge in mental health symptoms among older adults is situational and transitory versus associated with longer-term problems remains unclear. The nation is benefiting from widespread vaccination. In combination with natural immunity, such as the exponential growth of infection, has steeply dropped. Continued vigilance is required, however, because long after the pandemic debates, its mental health impact is likely to have a long tail. Sociological research suggests that folks at risk of developing major depression and anxiety disorders in the next decade aren't limited to those currently displaying symptoms. Those languishing today are also at risk. In the Archives of Medical Science, a Romanian physician questioned whether the expression celebrating old age became obsolete during the pandemic. Berlecu argued that the healthcare community needs to analyze the COVID-19 public health emergency response to find a way to better support and protect emotional well-being and quality of life for the geriatric population. We have witnessed openly ageist discourse, with painful ethical decisions that, together with the impermissibly high levels of mortality, morbidity, and social isolation, have augmented anxiety and hopelessness, as well as eroded social cohesion for the elderly members of our society. As they have felt marginalized and disconnected while facing increased dependence and vulnerability, some older adults ideate that death seemed to be the only possible way to escape feelings of meaninglessness and existential loneliness. It is vital to counteract such alienation with the implementation of programs that boost the ego integrity, self-efficacy, resilience, and sense of mattering for older adults. The overarching aim of my presentation was to evidence that efforts to protect mental health are as equally important as efforts to physically prevent and treat COVID-19, especially in regard to one of the highest risk groups, older adults. I've outlined protective factors and intervention strategies to help reduce the psychological footprint of the pandemic. Broadening the current paradigm of mental health care to include a collaborative care model on a larger scale is an urgent need. One promising example is a toolkit titled Living with the Times. It was published by the Interagency Standing Committee Reference Group on Mental Health and Psychosocial Support in March 2021. This resource includes posters with key messages for older adults on how to take care of their well-being and provide support to those around them during the pandemic. A total of 199 older adults between 60 and 90 years of age from 51 countries and different income groups and cultural contexts provided input to the design and content. The development of this toolkit was a unique interagency collaboration involving the International Federation on Aging, Help Age International, and Alzheimer's Disease International, together with a multidisciplinary panel of experts. The Living with the Times toolkit is comprised of 5 large poster illustrations with facilitator instructions to guide conversations. Here are posters number 2 and number 3. Now, I know these printouts are hard to see, but you can access the downloadable reference for them on slide 28. Each poster addresses one of the following questions. Poster 1, how can I stay healthy? Poster 2, what can I do to improve my mood? Poster 3, how can I feel connected to my family and community? 4, where can I get help if I need it? And poster 5, how can I cope with grief and loss? Let's hope that the pandemic year of suffering serves as an imperative for ongoing public debate on the place and role of older adults in our society, and will lead to some out-of-the-box thinking to reimagine and transform elder care for all. There's a burgeoning need as the number of Americans over 65 increases by 10,000 every day and will nearly double by 2050. There is great truth in the African proverb quoted by Alex Haley that every time an old person dies, it's like a library burning down. The elders in our society have much to teach us about life and about ourselves if we provide venues through which their wisdom and experiences can be shared. Everyone has a story they'd love to tell, whether it be a journey of great joy, tragedy, adventure, heartache, and/or love. If only we ask, spend time with one of them and listen. You'll both be forever enriched. I'd like to close by sharing 2 objects from the natural world that symbolize the need to take time to notice our elders with curiosity awakened about the beauty that lies within. At first glance, the camouflage blue morphle butterfly appears dull and brown, but upon closer examination, we discover its more captivating iridescent colored side. And when washed up on the shore, the nautilus's outer shell may appear crusty and unremarkable, but its inner beauty reveals a series of as many as 30 pearlescent spiral chambers or the life cycles of its growth. Thank you. Just to note, the next 5 slides list the 38 references upon which my talk is based. And now I look forward to inviting Deanna back in and addressing any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much for, wow, I have to say that was an unbelievable presentation. I learned so much during every part of that. And I want to personally thank you and thank you for your dedication to our older adults. The passion you have for them is unbelievable. So thank you so much, Carolyn. You are truly amazing and truly a blessing to have as part of our community here at Charles E. Smith Life Communities. I hope the attendees learned as much as I did during this presentation, because it was absolutely unbelievable, and we've all experienced those challenges throughout this past year. Now I'm excited to hear from the attendees and would like to be able to ask for you to put in questions so that we can ask Dr. Eichberg any questions that you have from her presentation. And I really would like to start with Carolyn, if you're okay with one that said, obviously you've got a huge passion and dedication to our seniors. Who is an older adult that has impacted your life, that has made a difference? If you don't mind sharing, that would be our first question for you.
I would have to say my late father, Dr. Morris Green. So as some of you may well know, my original training was as a pediatric psychologist, and my father was physician-in-chief of a children's hospital. Brilliant man, and we co-wrote several articles together. And in his later life, he suffered from dementia. And I witnessed firsthand what that experience was like for him and for my mother in terms of her own caregiving stress. And my father, when he was aware of the fact that his memory was fading, he bemoaned to me that, he said, at least I've taught you everything you need to know about working with children, about psychosocial aspects of working with kids. And I realized when he passed that his teaching was not done. Through him, I learned about older adults and dementia and caregiving. And I realized that there simply aren't enough psychologists working with the elder members of society. So I honor his memory by the work that I do. About 13 years ago, I shifted, and that's when I partnered with the Charles E. Smith Life Communities and switched to specialized with geriatrics.
Thank you so much for sharing that very special story with us. That really is very heartfelt and just really an amazing story. And I've not heard that. So thank you so very much for sharing that with us today. A question that we do have is, as a psychologist, what are recommendations to help older adults get past their feelings, not mattering, etc.?
Okay. So important to, as I talked about life story. So take them back in time. Many of them are, what they're experiencing right now is challenging, but try to help connect them to something in their past that gives them a sense that they really do matter, that their lives have made a difference. And you'll know when you kind of ignite them, and you can see their eyes light up. So I know there's so much focus on the current or whether they're sleeping well, eating well, but take them back in time and help them try to put things in perspective, and just to show curiosity and interest. And as I mentioned in the talk, use prompts, use photos, use letters, use objects in their home or their apartment. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Another question we have for you is, will these feelings of heightened neurocognitive systems diminish over time?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question. I know I've been asked frequently this past year to assess individuals, and they're struggling. And the question is this just as they're recovering from COVID, and will this improve? Will it not? Difficult to say, but I think it's important. I'm hesitant realizing we've all been somewhat isolated and we've all been struggling with lack of stimulation. So when I assess someone, I use it with a bit of caution. We all need, as things open up and we get re-engaged and stimulated, and we'll have a better sense. So I think it's hard to put, a definitive diagnosis right now when an older adult's world has been so closed off. So monitor it and provide some stimulation engagement. Thankfully, things are beginning to open up now. And that's when we look to see, as their appetite improves, their sleep improves, their engagement improves, whether or not some of those cognitive skills come back again or sharpen.
Thank you so much. Another question, and I really am really interested in this as being part of a senior living community and serving our older adults at Charles E. Smith Life Communities. Have you found that older adults who discuss their feelings with each other improve their outlook?
So it's variable, right? I think that older adults, it's been helpful for some to have the opportunity to be able to gather together and sort of group vent. They've been able to do that if they're in certain facilities where they're able to get together in small groups. Some over time I've worked with, sometimes they find that it brings them down and it's difficult. So I've talked about strategies of how you sort of monitor that as to whether it's a benefit or whether it is difficult.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is post-COVID-19 stress disorder an actual diagnosable disorder?
In terms of, the diagnostic codes that we use at this point in time, I'm not familiar that it is at this time.
Okay. Next question. How do extroverted seniors rebuild those social connections when many have been lost?
That's right. So part of it is just rehearsing with them. So I will say for men, but for the females, they're very, very, I had to work with a lot of females this year who didn't want to see their children on FaceTime or Zoom because if they weren't able to get their hair done, their self-care was a little different. They worried about how their children and grandchildren and friends would see them. So this is a lovely way to connect, but for some it was very, it was threatening, or to see themselves. So something's going to a little bit of a makeover that's important so they have more confidence. And then how do you do just kind of opening, how do you start a conversation? Conversation starters is helpful. And I think in some of the, I know on campus, some of that's going on too. And some of our staff is able to kind of get those conversations started. So as we all walk around, that's important to do as well, to realize how, and you can get people kind of connected and starting up.
Great. How do we reach older adults who are confused with the effects of COVID and want to stay alone and not connected?
Yeah, so I guess you find out for who is involved in their lives. Is it a family member? Is it a neighbor? Is it a friend? Who has the best chance of being able to connect, engage with that person, and find out, what they're comfortable doing, on a step-by-step basis. And it may be a family member, it may not be a family member. But I think most important is just to canvass and to find out who out there really is continuing to be isolated and does need that additional help at this time. And I find on our camp, some of the other residents are very, very helpful in cluing in. I mean, people can let us know who they're concerned about, who they're worried about, who might need some extra assistance. And families need to find that out too, of who in the family system might have the best chance of being able to draw that person back out again.
Okay. We talked about extroverts. Now here's a question about introverts. What is the best way to cope with reentry?
So, the introvert, and it was initially a lot of them thought, well, this is, I don't have to worry about having to go down to the communal dining room anymore and deal with all of that. But even after a period of time, it was difficult for them. To find, a lot of them don't like the traditional thinking, well, it would be perfectly lovely for them to go down and sit at a dining room table with a whole group of people. That may not be it's usually just one person, right? So large groups, small groups. So to find out what they are most comfortable with, but I think to assume that they will want to go back into the larger group settings, and it's difficult. A lot of the introverts, people got very focused on the televisions too. And it's difficult to sort of turn that off. But I think if you can connect one person with them is a helpful first start.
Great. Thank you so much. Great recommendations. Another question we have from our audience is, what are your thoughts on whether we will get back to a true normal that so many of our older adults are waiting for?
Yeah, that's, for the foreseeable future, I think it's going to be a different type of normal. The older adults, they're also very, very, they think about their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. That's of concern to them. So it's so important to give them some reassurance that generation and how things are improving for them. But it's not only their lives, but they're very aware of and looking at their family members, and are their lives going back to some sense of normal. So it's important to know how their various family members are coping as well. And that is slowly improving, but I think we're going to be dealing with the ramifications of this for the next, several years. This is, a lot of people kind of just been sort of in shock, and we're just now coming out of it and being able to process it. And some people really felt they couldn't let their guard down to be able to get through this. And now they're finally able to say they're okay with it. And as I mentioned, it's a struggle in families. People are at different, phases where they feel comfortable getting together or not getting together. And while the older adults were very ready very early on, their feeling is their lifespan is limited, and they'd rather risk, getting together. But so they're trying to balance that with other family members, and there's some tension still.
Okay. Thank you so much. So the last question we have right now, unless any others do come through, is, do you have any thoughts on how older adults will improve living in a residence, such as a senior living type of community, versus living on their own in a house or a townhouse?
The beauty of living in a senior facility community is the ease of access. Of course, very different when we were all shut down during the pandemic, but the ease of access to engage with another person. And so if they're out in the community on their own in an apartment, what it takes for them to make plans, whether they're driving, to get out, to go, many more steps involved with that. So again, it's sort of ease of access, and also having once we get back to sort of normal activities, having variety. There were those that will prefer a music program, those a lecture, and so you have a lot of different options, or a card game. It's difficult when you're out in the community, again, to set that up and make it happen. So on our campus, I know it's just a matter of getting someone to step out a door and go down a hallway, and that's delightful. That's happening once again.
I'm just looking real quick to make sure I don't have any other questions here. And it looks like that was the last one. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And thank you to the audience for asking all those great questions as well. And what an amazing presentation. It is such a pleasure and an honor to have Carolyn as part of our community and here today to share this amazing expertise with all of us. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first session of our Sara and Samuel J. Lessans Symposium. The next two sessions will be the next two Thursdays, the 17th and the 24th. We look forward to having you join us. To give you a little sneak peek of what will be presented at both of those is on June 17th, we're going to focus on the mental health support for our healthcare professionals. I'm really looking forward to that. I know it's been a tough year out there for many of our healthcare professionals, and we're so honored to have such amazing heroes out there. And on June 24th, we're going to learn about our journey through the pandemic. Another really great session. I myself am very excited to participate in all of those. If you have not already registered, for additional details and registration for both sessions is available on our website at smith-life.org. smithlifecommunities.org. So please feel free to join us there to sign up and get additional information on both of those sessions. I do, before we end, want to send out another thank you to all of our amazing partners and sponsors for this event. It really is a great opportunity for us to provide education on such a really important topic, as we have had obviously a life-changing experience for all of us here today. Also, please remember that we will be sending you out a survey via email, so please complete that and get that back to us as quickly as possible. And we truly look forward to seeing all of you next week on the 17th and again on the 24th. It is truly a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today. Have an amazing rest of your day. Stay well and stay healthy.